Thanks for joining us at Secular AZ today. We are a 501c3 organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for over a decade. It's been quite a week with an endless parade of SCOTUS decisions that are probably leaving many of us reeling. I know I am, and genuinely worried about the future of the separation of church and state. So far, in a week's time, they've overturned Roe, sided with the NRA with the New York conceal and carry decision, stripped the Environmental Protection Agency of the ability to, hold on, let me check my notes, protect the environment, expanded private school vouchers, and sided with forced prayer in schools. What's even more alarming, as if that isn't enough, is that they've agreed to hear a case next term from North Carolina that would essentially allow state legislatures and assemblies to overturn elections. It's important to remember that there are extremist evangelical Supreme Court justices who truly believe that they need to usher in a holy war to bring Jesus Christ back. To quote the author and essayist Lauren Hogue, these aren't rational people. They're clinic bombers in robes. They're terrorists in suits. They've never hidden this. I mean, yeah, they'll lie to Congress. Oaths mean nothing to them. Paul said it's fine to lie to the Romans, but they've never hidden who they are and what their goal is. And it's not a fictional Gilead. It's Bible-approved genocide. Ask any evangelical what the end game is here. It's genocide, and Jesus comes back to take them to heaven while we burn. They truly believe this, and they are working to make this happen. So that was from Lauren Hogue. Definitely sobering when you think about it like that. The most important thing that any of us can do right now is to get behind a candidate or two or three and work for them. Knock doors, make calls, drive volunteers around, whatever it takes, because the state legislatures, secretaries of state, district attorney, and attorney general's offices will have the real authority to determine how these decisions play out in our own backyards. And of course, supporting the work of organizations like ours will allow for us to be your voice for the separation of church and state. Our membership is what drives our programming, and it helps us to bring in diverse speakers. If you've been enjoying the programming we've been bringing to you during this past legislative session, if you enjoy receiving our action alerts and email updates, please become a member today at secularaz.org. So today we are joined by college professor, political consultant, and one of the founders of Save Our Schools Arizona. Dawn Penich-Thacker has a PhD in rhetoric and linguistics and is considered an expert in communication and has been featured in multiple nationwide publications. Today, she will be breaking down the legislative budget in Arizona for the 2022 legislative session. So welcome, Dawn. How are you today?
Well, I'm good, but dang, Jeannie, you sure know how to bring down a Friday. Like, it's not you. You're just the messenger. You're just the messenger. Yeah. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. But no, I'm doing great, and I'm so happy to be here. And you're absolutely right that the most important thing that any of us can do is get behind the candidates who stand by the values that we hold. And I would just add on to that and start talking now to your friends and family and neighbors about voting down ballot, turning that ballot over and actually casting votes in those school board races, county attorney, water board, all of that stuff that's tough to pay attention to, tough to know about, even for, folks who do try to pay attention. So, yeah, so that's just my little pitch there for turning that ballot over and talking to all your friends about doing so.
Mm-hmm. We've already heard Rachel Mitchell come out and say that she would not prosecute any cases of abortion with victims of rape and incest. But we also have another candidate who said she's not going to prosecute any of them, whether it's rape, incest, whether it's a private decision made by a person and their healthcare provider. So we have a choice here, and they have the discretion to be able to prosecute whichever cases they prioritize. So they could prioritize nonviolent drug offenses and people seeking abortions, or they could choose to prosecute things that actually, matter and keep our streets and our cities safer. So with that, so let's hear it. They're talking about a bipartisan budget. So why don't you give us the big chunks here and kind of tell us how the state of Arizona, how the legislature has decided to spend taxpayer dollars in this 2022 session, Dawn. And if you need to share the screen, by all means, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't planning to, but I can throw together a quick PowerPoint if you need. No. So, kind of big picture, the budget for this coming year was about 18 billion with a B dollars. So largest budget, thanks in very large part to the state having a 5.7 billion with a B dollar surplus. So, this massive infusion of dollars is what really paved the way for a lot of the programs that we're seeing for the very first time or for the first time in decades. But also it's what paved the way for a lot of the crap that we ended up with. And so I'm going to say something that you don't often hear me say, which is that Robert Robb, the longtime conservative columnist for the Arizona Republic, really got it right when he said that this budget is a GOP budget with a few bright spots by Democrats that could have been a lot more and could have been a lot brighter had our Democratic legislature members known how to use the leverage that they had by having such tight margins. The GOP was an absolute disaster this legislative session. The infighting, the extremism against one another within the GOP was such that Democrats really had a big opportunity to leverage that. And I think because our Democrats here in our Arizona legislature are so unpracticed in having leverage, that it just couldn't come together maybe the way that those of us who are, armchair referees and coaches think it could have and should have. So there are some big numbers around education that we can break down. There are some big numbers around water that we should scratch the surface on. So yeah, we can kind of take it in whatever direction you want.
Well, let's start off. We don't often get to hear good news in Arizona. So what are some of the positive pieces that come out of this budget that actually support the needs of the majority of Arizonans, the working class and those with children and families and struggling to pay rent? What good stuff came out?
Yeah, so, my favorite topic, one of my favorite topics is education. So I'll kind of talk about some of that. Kind of depends on who you ask. Numbers are always a little bit subjective, right? Even though they're numbers, but, depending on who you ask, education, K-12 education got anywhere from, 650 to 800 million. Some folks are rounding that up to $1 billion. New dollars. Not all of that is continuing, but for the first time, there is funding in there for things like the special education formula, which has been ignored for literally decades. For the first time, there is consistent, sustainable funding for a poverty weight, meaning additional dollars that acknowledge the fact that students in impoverished areas, students of families living in poverty, have higher needs than, the student who never has to wonder whether there's going to be food on the table, never has to wonder, whether there's going to be an adult at home, because of working multiple jobs or maybe having a mixed, immigration status family. And so a poverty weight is really a big deal. And then the base per pupil funding got a boost as well. So that means every single kiddo in the state is going to get a higher investment. So what that does is, in the education world, we're always out there with our posters talking about Arizona being, 49th, 48th, 50th in funding. Just kind of depends on the year. What those investments do is move us up about 5 notches. So we're about 45th. And on the one hand, you can say that's still bad, but on the other hand, it's 5 steps forward in a single year. And so, if you want to be an optimist about it, you can say, if we can move 5 steps every legislative session, or if we can keep this up, we can get back to those funding levels that people like me enjoyed when I was going to Arizona's K-12 schools in the 90s, right? When we were in the middle of the national standards, we were 30th, 27th, kind of in that range. Another bright spot was $200 million for capital improvements. So we have public schools across the state, largely in rural areas, that are literally falling apart. I mean, the ceiling is caving in from, roof leaks that have gone unaddressed. We've got playgrounds with sinkholes in them. We've got school carpets that are full of rot. So $200 million. Now, keep in mind, there is a lawsuit that has been moving through our judicial system for years now, specifically suing the state for ignoring these capital needs for so long. And that lawsuit is for a much bigger number, but $200 million is a chunk of money that will get roofs fixed. It will get ACs fixed. It will start to move the needle in some of these most basic needs of our public schools.
You mentioned rural schools. Does that mean that the money is specifically prioritized for rural schools, or is it just kind of equally divided up amongst all whatever 300 districts that are in Arizona?
Yeah, no, there's not an earmark specifically for types of schools. So, that'll be, that'll move down kind of the pike into those kind of local control decisions of where that money needs to go, where the needs are. And that, as we know, in Arizona is a blessing and a curse, when we have kind of that big number and then it gets divvied out from there. Those are some of the best and brightest spots in the education budget. They are somewhat tempered by remembering that, of course, that's all money that we, the voters, already said we want to spend. Mm-hmm. We said it twice when we put Prop 208, invest in ed #1 on the ballot, toward the ballot, and it never got there. And then when we actually voted it into place and the Arizona Supreme Court threw it out. And so, I guess we should be happy that the money that we already said we want to spend gets to be spent, and that those kiddos in our special ed programs and our rural schools are actually going to see some of this improvement.
So I have a question though, because, at the midnight hour, right, there was this, what was it, HB 2853, another massive voucher expansion. So you talk about how $1 billion is added. How quickly is that going to get siphoned right out of our public schools and put into private religious schools that actually condone discriminatory practices and can block students from, receiving, from getting into that school based on their sexuality, based on perhaps their test scores? So how does that $1 billion, how much of that can just be, now actually, because all these people now, multimillionaires now, are taking advantage of these vouchers, is just going to disappear from our public schools?
Yeah, and the scary thing is that we don't know the answer to that. We know that next year alone, this, might very well be a $33 million price tag. So if you think about, we just gave $50 million to our special ed programs that have been starving for decades. And yet in a single year, we could use $33 million on a private school voucher program that is now available to everyone in the state. So So it's really scary to think about how much of that funding is going to be siphoned out, and the fact that it's going to be siphoned out by folks who didn't already qualify under, our kind of legacy voucher program, which, kind of had these carve outs for kiddos with special needs or kiddos in the foster care system. And, we could have a whole other Zoom about, the kind of the integrity and the truthfulness of the pre-voucher program, even before this universal expansion. But it'll be interesting. Private school enrollments have been stagnant for many years in Arizona. And so it's an unanswered question of whether this is going to change that, and private school enrollments are going to start creeping or skyrocketing up. The other thing that really, we're going to be watching to see is the difference between traditional private schools, brick and mortar, associated with a church or that kind of thing, and versus micro schools, which is this, somewhat recent scam where folks are holding school in their living room and using an online program, and no one knows what's going on with those kids. No one knows what they're learning. No one knows who else is in the house. No one knows what's in that house. And we are funding that absolutely now as taxpayers at, universally. So, and we also know that there will now be people flooding into the state to exploit this program by opening private schools, specifically because they now have a guaranteed income source with absolutely no accountability measures, neither for academic quality nor for, basics like student safety. Mm-hmm. And so we have really just created a really scary Pandora's box, and we won't know until we start to see, I think, the horror stories start to come out about exactly who is taking advantage of this.
Yeah, well, and I was listening, I think it was, I don't know if it was in the committee itself or on the floor debate, but I believe it was Kelly Butler, maybe Mitzi Epstein was another one who were bringing up the, some of the expenditures, a whole home gym, for one of these micro school, for these ESA, these vouchers, you basically, I guess, put in a purchase order, and then because the law is so, broad, it can be interpreted that just about anything that you say you need for your micro school. So there were bouncy houses, there were home gym, setups, all kinds of different things, and again, who knows what kind of curriculum, whether that curriculum's been vetted, whether it, I'm reading yesterday and today that in both Florida and Texas, they're rewriting the standards and they're renaming slavery. They're no longer calling it slavery, but they're calling it something,
worker migration or something like that.
What did you say?
It's something like worker migration or labor migration or something like that.
Yeah. So, again, an inaccurate, involuntary relocation in Texas. Thank you, Judith. Yeah, that's what they're calling it. So that's really alarming. I also just read a statistic the other day that people between the ages of 16 and 64 or something like that 54% of people can read at a 6th grade level. And so it really seems like the dumbing down, the spoon feeding of exactly what you want students to learn. Last week, we talked a little bit about a private school that said it was Christian, conservative, and constitutional, but what part of the Constitution are they teaching? And also, they seem to be really enamored with the Old Testament, not so much about the New Testament. I'm pretty sure that if Jesus was around right now, a lot of these evangelicals would be the first ones to crucify him because, he acts like a a compassionate human being, maybe even a socialist. So, that's just a little scary to me. There's a couple more things that I saw in here. I saw that there was a budget increase, an additional 50 million for school resource officers. Let's see, I saw, can you maybe explain the elimination, and I'm getting this right from the Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, the Melinda Iyer, is it her report, I believe? And it says the elimination of $85 million in teacher compensation. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, and somebody popped this into the chat if I misspeak on this detail. I believe that that's the one tied to performance pay. And so that's a tough one because I'm no fan of performance pay that says that, on top of everything that teachers are doing now, you're worrying about, whether you're going to get paid because someone thinks you're doing a good job or not. And, this kind of arbitrary metric.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what so eliminating that portion of the pay scale or the pay opportunity, I guess, is what I would call it. You talked about the $50 million specifically for SROs, which schools are instructed to spend it on school resource officers before trying to spend it on counselors or social workers. So I believe it was last session, there was a pot of money that could be spent either way, and it was up to the school district to decide how they wanted to spend it, but this fund is directed for SROs. There's also $58 million. So 58 million for results-based funding, which is another kind of like, there's $50 million for the poverty weight, which we have been fighting for across the political spectrum, actually fighting for decades, but $58 million for results-based funding, which we know punishes low-income districts, because it's based on test performance. And we know that for a multitude of social reasons, impoverished areas perform lower on these tests. And so 50 million for poverty, but 58 million for test scores, which we know impoverished communities will not get. Right. And so that's what, I would kind of say that's kind of the theme of this budget. For every bright spot, you kind of turn it over and it's like, oh, yeah, under the bright spot is a bunch of thorns, There's also another $5 million in the budget for Koch funded departments in our 3 universities. And so they've already got a bunch of money. And this is another $5 million for them to spread around, specifically and directly for Koch funded and libertarian ideals. So there's a lot there. Let's see, I wanted to comment on something that you had said earlier, but I lost my train of thought. So maybe we just move on to something and it'll come back.
Well, and I just want to take a minute to point out too, this is the party that always says that they are the party of fiscal conservancy, and they are the ones who know how to best spend your tax dollars. And so on the one hand, yeah, we've got an opportunity weight now, for kids who are in impoverished schools. But on the other hand, we still have this letter grade nonsense that we know just elevates schools that are already doing well and funds schools that are already doing well while punishing schools that aren't. So if you would just pick one, perhaps we wouldn't have to do this, but it's all just kind of a shell game, Yeah, here's another $1 billion, but hey, by the way, we're going to let just about anybody sign up for a private school voucher. Doesn't make any sense, and it's not good. They're not being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and to think otherwise or to promote themselves in any other way is just a bald-faced lie. So there's that.
And you saying that reminded me of the train that I had just lost. Maybe this is an unpopular or misguided kind of perspective, but I'm actually less concerned about, the education that these kids are getting whose parents are, putting them in these wacky, like extremist religious schools. I'm more concerned about the funding that the rest of us, the rest of the kids aren't going to get because of that. Because if you're a kid and you're in this extremist, Christian white nationalist family, like you're getting that education already. So to me, it's kind of like, well, yeah, but that's another $7,000, $33 million, $164 million that every other kid isn't going to be able to, have invested into them and their reliable education and their rigorous education. And therefore, that's what the rest of us as a state aren't going to get out of these kids. And so, that's always been my perspective. It's kind of like, if you're the folks who are taking, these vouchers for your weird little micro school, whatever, but what about the rest of the kids? Mm-hmm. So it's tough.
Yeah, I would just thought of another question. Let me see if it'll come back to me. Oh boy. Well, okay, I'll just go back then to the civic engagement document real quick, but I see that there's a $17 million boost for private prisons. And just as a reminder, it says in our state constitution that our public universities should be as nearly free as possible. Currently, our state spends more on our prison system than it does on all three of our public universities combined. So a $17 million boost for private prisons. And I don't see it in here right now. Maybe I'm just not going down far enough, but I believe I saw something too that made even further cuts to the community college system. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I remember seeing that somewhere. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I was just going to say, kind of along the lines of these, like, trying to have it both ways and everybody loses kind of thing. Actually, in higher ed, there were pretty consistent, there were kind of increases across the board. And so, ASU is getting another $50 million, NAU is getting an additional $26 million. The community colleges are getting an additional $10 million specifically for STEM, so science, technology, and occupational type programming, which is great because the state has long been cutting our community colleges out of the funding formulas and out of the budget, which is just, boggles the mind, given that we're all talking about, that we need to be doing more for our labor force, for our worker education, for occupational areas. And there is also money in there. Another bright spot, there is money specifically in the higher ed portion of the budget for low income scholarships. So it's not a lot, it's 12.5 million, but that's specifically for folks, who can go to college easier now with this additional state funding on top of what they might be applying for from federal financial aid or, scholarship programs and stuff like that. So those are nice numbers. So what is that? 50, 26. So, about $100 million new dollars for higher ed, but there's also $500 million for the border wall and for border security. So $100 million for college, yay. $500 million for the fence, though. So, and I think that right there is a really good example, microcosm example of like what Robert Robb and what you and I are saying right now, which is this is very much a GOP budget that just got passed. It is a GOP priorities budget. It just has some, more progressive kind of splotches here and there, and we should celebrate them. They're better than zero, but there's no reason to kind of sit back on, and feel like things are good.
Yeah, it's so depressing. It's better than zero. Like that could be
zero.
That could be our new, that could be on our license plate, a bumper sticker, our state motto. Hey, we're better than zero.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's see. Judith reminded me of the question, and that is, so what about the AEL? The expenditure
aggregate expenditure limit.
So is that going to be an issue next year?
Yes, very much so, because that's another kind of inconceivable. They spent they did the wrangling, they did the negotiating, they got all this new money, some of it one time, some of it sustaining dollars into K-12, but they somehow didn't sit down to actually eliminate that spending limit that is going to make it so that schools cannot spend any of this new money. And so the governor has indicated that they will call a special session and take care of this. Folks that I generally trust, our colleagues over at Stanford Children, for instance, and folks that have him on record at the Arizona Republic, say that they believe that he will keep his word on this and calling a special session. But assuming that he does, that will be a one-time lift, which means that it will have to be taken up again in a future year. It'll have to go to the ballot, because this is a constitutional limit on how much K-12 can spend at any given time. And so with all this new money, they are inevitably going to surpass the limit by at least $1 billion with a B dollars just this coming year. So they'll take care of it for the one time so that schools can spend this money, and then they'll fight it out again. And depending on what kind of legislature we get for next year, this may very well not be a done deal. And they could, if we get a more far right legislature than we have now, they could absolutely choose to keep this limit in place, to keep these funds captive as, kind of their way of continuing to starve and punish public education, which of course is kind of, the overall objective of the school choice privatization far right movement.
Yeah, that's been their long game. You have to at least admire their chess game ability, because, this has been in the works since the 90s with the end goal of privatizing schools. I think of New Orleans and the opportunity that they saw in Hurricane Katrina to fully privatize the schools in New Orleans. And I think of Arizona as, Fife Symington was the one that ushered in charter schools, no accountability. And now here we are, and they're really seeing the fruits of their labor. This is what they wanted the whole entire time. It's been clear to me since becoming, involved when my children were younger, and then in being a teacher. And now it's so obvious. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's finally become obvious, I think, to the rest, to the general public, to education advocates. I think it started to become obvious a handful of years ago, but you're right, it's been obvious to them, the people driving this train since day one, and they have been relentless and laser focused and, taken every kind of pause and just come right back to it. The pandemic was a huge boon for them as well. So the rest of us are looking at this as a horrific tragedy, and challenge for humanity. And the school choice movement is like, perfect.
Yep. They have dollar signs in their eyes, So I want to, for folks who maybe don't know why the Republicans had to get support from the Democrats this time around. Who were the holdouts of the Republican Party, and what was their problem with the budget that was presented by their own party? Because this is kind of like the soap opera, telenovela, fun stuff that people maybe don't know, and it could even indicate some weak spots within the party itself.
Yeah, well, the short answer is Paul Boyer. And unfortunately, people will argue this point for sure. The Arizona Republic recently referred to him as the last moderate Republican. I know a lot of people who would not consider him a moderate Republican, but you can work with that. But in many, many ways, especially on the education budget, he was the holdup. He, to his credit, acknowledged that Prop 208 said that voters wanted an additional $1 billion in K-12, and he held out saying, you know, we got rid of Prop 208, so we should make up for it with the money we have. And so there was that, and then it kind of boils down to that. There were other holdouts kind of on some of the other issues. You know, there was some of the legislature trying to go in terms of integrity and voting rights and access to elections, with some of their colleagues, you know, pushing back on that. Folks who wanted to get rid of, you know, and they got some of it done. So like having to reprove your citizenship. So all of us who are, you know, verified voters, having to reprove our eligibility to vote. You know, a bill to make it so that even if you use an early voting ballot, so, you know, voting from home and mailing it in, you have to include a picture of your voter card and include an affidavit that you are who you say you are in your PEVL, you know, in your early ballot. So just all these crazy extremist things that even within the Republican Party, you had like Hoffman at the extreme, Ugenti Rita, no surprise. And then some of the moderate folks saying, you know, I can't do that, you know, my constituency uses early ballots. They're not trying to photocopy their IDs to vote. And so that was where election integrity and education were probably the two areas that had the most kind of infighting and holdouts within the Republican Party that allowed for Democrats to be able to, you know, kill some bad bills that they otherwise couldn't have, or, you know, move the needle in some significant ways. There's also a few ballot initiatives that we might mention because we will be seeing them on our ballot. So understanding what they are and how they got there is really interesting.
Well, I was actually going to ask you next about HCR 2015, which would ask voters to require that all initiatives and referenda that include a tax component, such as funding for public education, pass with a 60% supermajority of voters. Now, to me, and maybe it's because I'm, you know, I've been really focused on local politics for such a long time. I just can't even imagine, like, how could you present this or package this to the voters for them to think, yes, I want my ability to have my voice heard limited. Great idea, GOP. Like, how are they going to sell that bill of goods to the voters? That one is astounding to me.
Yeah, well, part of me doesn't want to answer because I don't want to give them any ideas on how to market and pitch this. So maybe we can like have that in a, you know, less public conversation one day or something. But, you know, it will be interesting. I think that all of the ballot initiatives that they've referred to the ballot are going to, you know, be an uphill battle, thank goodness. But, you know, if you think back to, I believe it was the 2018 ballot, they had the initiative that got rid of service taxes, which largely don't exist. So they were, you know, kind of preemptively getting rid of something that doesn't exist anyway in the same year that they're like that Red for Ed was happening and people were already clamoring for more funding. And they pulled that off. I believe that initiative to get rid of a tax that doesn't even exist for the most part got the most votes of anything on the entire ballot. So that's like you said, we can admire the far right for their consistency, and we can admire them for their kind of creativity and messaging, I guess I would diplomatically call it. When they want to achieve something, they have no problem framing it however they want to frame it.
Yeah, no, truth telling is not one of their strong character traits. You know,
nor integrity.
No, as somebody who tracks legislation, I'm always blown away by the dishonesty, the hypocrisy, and the cruelty, because those three words kind of sum it up for what I saw this legislative session. And we need people in office who have compassion for their fellow Arizonans and not just a handful. And speaking of, I just have to, some of these are so ridiculous. I just want to share some of these tax cuts too from the budget. Let's see, where did I see that? Hold on. Oops, I think it's in this one right here. Let's see. Oh, shoot. Where's the budget one that I was just looking at? Come on, Castine, get it together. There was one about private jets and tax breaks for private jets. This one was Representative Grantham, representative or senator, I'm not sure. I think it's representative. $2 million yearly tax break for private jets. That made it into the budget via HB 2871. Let's see. You mentioned the border fence. That one says $335 million, not quite 500, but close. Let's see.
Well, the border is the fence, and then the security of the fence is the 500. Yes,
there you go. $500 million. Yeah. Okay.
You don't have to staff classrooms, but you have to staff a fence.
Oh, right. That reminds me too. There was a bill about increasing, the court, the judges in the courts and the money.
Yes.
And it was in one of the committees, and they were saying, well, people won't want to be a judge if we can't pay them what they're worth. And we were all, because there were a bunch of us from, that were dressed in red, teachers and teacher allies. And we all just kind of looked at each other like, oh, imagine that. If we actually paid people what their degrees are worth, we could get better, high quality, but that they don't really get the hypocrisy or the double standard there.
No, that's totally invisible. And that, I'm so glad you bring that up. That's another, I don't know if maybe it's a little esoteric, but it hasn't gotten as much, kind of coverage or conversation as I think it should. But yeah, the expansion of Ducey appointed judges is, it's one, like you said, it's one of those things that's just long game. And we saw it with the Trump administration at the federal level. We have seen Ducey do it in his tenure already. And so, again, back to that, this is a GOP budget. This is a legacy that will be with us for generations by expanding, that panel, those courts. Yeah.
And also, right, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but any adjustment to the taxes in Arizona, any rollback has to, you have to have a 2/3 vote in the House, in the legislature, or it has to go to a referendum and pass through the state, which if this HCR 2015 passes, then they'll also need a 2/3 majority to actually repeal any of these tax cuts. But I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong again, have made more tax cuts since 2008 and more cuts to education than any other state of the union. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So it's pretty clear where the priorities are with the ruling party. They rule as if they have a supermajority, but let's remember that there's one seat deficit in each chamber, one seat in the House where the numbers are 31-29, one seat in the Senate where the numbers are 16-14. If we can flip just one seat in each chamber, then we'll have a 50-50 split. We will be able to chair committees. We will be able to see to it that more than just 1% of the bills put forward by the Democrats actually make it into a committee hearing, because currently that is what's happening. Regardless of what the constituents want, say in an LD 24, the old 24, the old 29, no matter what those folks want, it's the ruling party that determines whether their representative in the House or the Senate will even get a chance to advocate on their behalf. So doesn't matter where that seat is gained, but that wherever those seats are gained, those individuals can advocate for the entire state of Arizona. So are there any questions from the audience? And is there anything, Dawn, that you would like to cover that maybe perhaps I didn't ask you the questions?
there's some interesting stuff on water, which we can either get to or not. But one thing that you were just saying about, the tight margins and the fact that if we can just even out one or both chambers, and if we can elect a Democrat to governor, it would be a completely different world if even just one of those things would happen. But one thing that I think is, again, a bright spot, but hopefully not one that's too thorny when you turn it over, is I think that and I would be interested in folks like maybe typing or sharing your reaction to this. I think that one good thing has come out of our Senator Sinema situation and some of our more moderate Democrats is that folks are fed up with that and kind of see through it. And because I look at the crop of folks running for the legislature now on the Democratic side, and there are some amazing people running. Some of them are running against incumbents. I'll just go there and say that, who are not going to sit there and be, chamber Democrats voting for police, in our schools, or voting for charter and corporate takeovers of our district schools. And so I am actually very enthusiastic. I'm very inspired by some of the people that we get to vote for this November. And that's exciting. And if you don't have one of those exciting people in your district, maybe you're in one of the districts that, is kind of considered a hope, then, get in that car, I'll come with you. Let's go knock doors in those areas that have exciting people in them, because it could be a real game changer.
I do have a comment, and it looks like a question coming from Facebook. So Erica is commenting, this year after redistricting, it's a whole new ballgame. It's really not a case of flipping seats. Well, I mean, the legislative districts themselves may have a different makeup and different chances of winning, but there's still opportunities to flip seats. Kathy says about the legislature seat ratio, do the Dems even have a candidate running for every seat in the House and the Senate? I had read that Dems don't even have a shot to retain their seats, let alone flip seats. I mean, I can talk about that one a little bit. No, there's not. There's not going to be somebody running in every district, especially in a district where there's a 20-point margin that favors Republicans. If you're in LD3, which is like what, North Scottsdale, Fountain Hills, Cave Creek, Queen Creek, right? Or Cave Creek and Carefree, you're not going to have anybody running, because it is, first of all, it's grueling work. Running for office is not fun. It's not glamorous. It's time consuming. It's impossible to balance. It's a dirty, thankless job. And unless you're some kind of, weirdo egomaniac and you actually enjoy that kind of thing, it's not enjoyable. People who do it because they care. And if you're going to be running in a super red district, knowing you're running to lose, well, that means you're sacrificing time with your family, you're sacrificing time at your job, you might even scale back on your job or take a pay cut. And so while I do agree that it would be nice to have somebody to vote for in those super red districts, I can't think of anybody who would really want to do that. Now, I know that there are some people who are doing it, that somebody's running against Townsend and Rogers because they were sick and tired of their hateful, bigoted vitriol. But I'm guessing that guy doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell, and I know that there's some other really amazing candidates who are truly passionate, who have been showing up at the Capitol, but they're probably not going to win. Now, maybe they'll be able to move the needle, but you have to remember that these seats, they don't, just because people are sick and tired and fed up, these districts have been gerrymandered to the point where getting a Democrat to win is damn near impossible. And so for those folks who do step up, I appreciate you. But I don't think it's going to be easy to find folks to run to lose in a gerrymandered district. It's just not going to be easy. Let's see. Erica says too, 12 current Republicans and 17 current Dems in the legislature are not running again, in most cases because of redistricting. And there are some that I'm really sad to see go, or that I'm worried about because now they're in, highly contested districts. Do you want to speak to that at all, Dawn?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are a handful, kind of the central Phoenix area has a bunch of great folks all running for the same, couple seats. So I don't want to get too into it and start like swaying or whatever people's thoughts on folks that would all be an improvement over what we have or would all vote the same way ultimately. But there are some areas where, yeah, we're losing good people, but we're going to get good people behind them, right? And then there are some folks who, there have been a lot of headlines about elections officials just quitting their jobs and leaving because of how horrifically they have been treated over the last few years. And there are good folks in the legislature who are doing that too. They're just done.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so sad.
Yeah.
They're just done. But, let's focus more so on the folks who are in it, who are going for it, and give them all the support we possibly can, because that's who we need.
Yep.
And yeah, the math is not good. The math is not good. Whoever made that comment, you are correct. Some things are not possible. But we can take the Senate, we can tie the Senate, and we can keep the House in play, and we sure as heck can go for that governor's seat.
Yeah. And I'm grateful, Kelly Butler is one of those who's now pivoting, and she's going to run for the Maricopa County Community Colleges Board. I think that, for zero pay, I mean, it's $24,000, a whopping $24,000 to serve at the state Senate or the state House. But she's taking a $24,000 pay cut so that she can serve the community college system. I know Jennifer Germain, Representative Germain, is running for Justice of the Peace in that area over in like Tempe, Ahwatukee-ish kind of area, maybe Chandler a little bit. So there are some people, really fantastic people that we're losing or that have termed out, but who are also seeking higher office. One of my favorites, Senator Martin Quesada, he has decided to run for treasurer. Now I know that's an uphill battle. People, when they think of money, they think that the Republicans are better equipped to handle it. But statistically speaking, we know that the Republican Party is no longer the party of fiscal conservancy. So that will be an interesting race and see how that plays out.
I saw Diane popped up a comment, and I just want to put exclamation points on it. Attorney General and County Attorney, if you're, I know secular AZ is statewide, but, for the 4.4 million people in Maricopa, because if these bad, horrific, punishing laws are going to get passed in the legislature, at least we can have a county attorney and an attorney general who's going to say, I'm not going down that road, and so Julie Gunnigal and Chris Mays, yeah, we need them in place so bad.
Well, and our Secretary of State too, Mark Fincham, who is, he was there on January 6th, a known insurrectionist and oath keeper or Proud Boy. I don't even know. I can't keep those hate groups straight anymore. But, thinking of him getting in as the Secretary of State is an election denier, downright terrifying. I mean, I don't know if you watched. I tried to watch the Arizona Horizon debate with the Republican the governor candidates. Save yourself time and headache and energy, because it was a mess. Ted Simons is an Arizona treasure, and there were so many times during that debate where I was just looking at his face and I just wanted to buy him a drink or, bake him some cookies, because he looked just
give him a teddy bear or something. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird time. Ballots drop. Thank you, Judith. Primary ballots are going to be mailed on the 6th of July. Election day for the primary is August 2nd. Please vote the whole ballot. Thank you for that public service announcement, Judith. She even put into the chat a link for your vote to verify your voter registration. So yes, you definitely want to verify your registration. Diane says that a friend of hers was kicked off the rolls for no reason. So it's a good time to check in and make sure that you are all set to vote. because they did try to make it more difficult for people to vote. Thankfully, I think the majority of them were kind of batted away, but there were still some that made it through.
I just wanted to, going back to my talk, to, post on your Facebook, put a write on your car, whatever it takes. Only 10% of independents actually vote in the primaries, even, because we have this crazy system that makes a lot of independents think that they can't vote. And then some just choose not to, but can you believe that statistic? Only 10% of Arizona Independent Party registrants vote in the primaries. So if, Independent Party is the largest party in our state, and only 10% are voting. So talk to your friends.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. And it's something that you have to request every election, correct? So it's not like you requested a Democratic ballot in 2018 and now you're just going to keep getting it. No, every single election you have to request, whether you want Democrat or whether you want Republican. So, for those folks who are an independent in a solidly red district, at the very least, then they could choose from the candidates that are in that primary, or in, say, like a legislative district 5, where there is a very crowded Democratic playing field. You could, have your voice heard and who's going to be able to get onto the ballot. Karen says, so they're independent to make a statement, then they don't even vote. Well, I have thoughts on that, Karen. I definitely do, but I'll keep them to myself. So. Lindsay has put in our chat some of the events that we have coming up on Thursday. Wait, I'm not far enough. Hold on just a second. There we go. It's scrolling so quickly. Okay, Wednesday. Thank you. Now it's on the screen. July 6th, Deer Valley Unified School District Governing Board Candidate Forum. So far, we have 2, possibly 3 candidates who are going to show up from Deer Valley. And let's remember, folks, Deer Valley is where there is a seated school board member who's married to a known white supremacist, and where there's another 3%er. He's part of the 3%ers, which is along with Oath Keepers, with Proud Boys, other white supremacist organization. He's running for Deer Valley. So you'll probably want to tune in to find out more about the candidates that aren't white supremacists. Might be good to know. And then on Thursday, July 21 at 6 p.m., we are going, and I'm very excited about this one. Thank you to Lindsay for planning all this and getting a hold of all these people. We're going to have a reproductive rights, justice, and religion discussion panel. So we have people joining us from different faiths to talk about how this is a violation of the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause, because right now, evangelical Christians are imposing their religious beliefs on us through the, evangelical extremists that are on the Supreme Court. So that's going to be a really interesting discussion. This one, really exciting. Published author Catherine Joyce. She's written for Salon, New Republic, Mother Jones. She's the author of Quiverful on Christo-fascist attacks on the LGBTQ community. She's done some really amazing articles talking about these young white men who we've seen all through the month of June, attacking drag story hours, attacking pride parades and other pride events throughout the nation. So we have some great programming coming up. And again, this programming doesn't happen without your help, without your membership. And when you do become a member, you get open up to even more opportunities to learn with us, to take classes with us, to have events with us. So please let that be my sales pitch to become a member today. If you're enjoying these discussions that we've been having for this legislative session, please put your money where your mouth is and go and donate to our organization, secularaz.org. Dawn Penich-Thacker, you're one of my favorite people. You're in a foreign country and you're here with a 9-hour time difference. Thank you so much for coming. Any parting thoughts that will uplift the people? Since I brought everybody down at the beginning, maybe you can lift them up.
There are so many events and canvases and phone banks and postcard writing sessions going on all over the state. That's what I do. When I get so just absolutely demoralized by all this, I go to Facebook, I look at the events that friends are RSVPing to, and I find something that makes me feel like I'm at least making a difference. And you feel better and you hang out with cool people. So that's my final thought. We can do this. We need to do this. And thank you, Secular AZ, for always being such an amazing font of information on so many issues.
Well, thanks. You really helped break it down today. I'm grateful for you. Safe travels for when you return, and stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye, everyone.